Hey, welcome back to English in Fluency, the channel that helps you understand real English the way real people actually speak it. I'm Alex, and I'm really glad you clicked on this video, because today we're talking about something that trips up almost every English learner I've ever worked with, even the ones who already speak pretty well. Here's a question for you. Have you ever had a conversation in English where everyone seemed friendly, everyone seemed to agree, and then later you found out that someone had actually said no to you the whole time? You just didn't catch it. If that's ever happened to you, don't worry, you're not alone. And honestly, it happens to native speakers too sometimes, especially kids and teenagers who are still learning how grown-ups talk to each other. English speakers, especially in places like the UK, the US, Canada, and Australia, rarely say no in a direct, flat way. Saying a blunt no can sound rude, cold, even a little aggressive, so people wrap their disagreement in soft words, gentle tones, and little phrases that basically mean, "I don't agree," or "I won't do that," without ever using the word no at all. And that's exactly what we're going to practice today. By the end of this video, you're going to be able to listen to a conversation and actually catch those hidden moments of disagreement, those polite refusals that hide behind a smile and a calm voice. We're going to follow a story, listen to real conversations, slow down and break apart the exact words people use, and then you're going to practice saying them yourself. This is a proper listening lesson, level B1, so if you already understand simple conversations, but you still get confused when people disagree with you in a soft, indirect way, this video was made for you. Grab a notebook if you like to write things down, get comfortable, maybe pause whenever you need to, and let's get into it together. Let me set the scene for you. We're going to follow a young woman named Naomi through one single day of her life. It's a normal Tuesday, nothing dramatic, just an ordinary day. But in that one day, Naomi is going to disagree with people, and people are going to disagree with her again and again in all sorts of small, everyday situations. At work, with her best friend, with her brother, with her landlord, and even with a stranger at a coffee shop. And every single time, we're going to stop the story for a moment, rewind the conversation in our heads, and figure out exactly how that polite no was hidden inside the words. Think of this almost like detective work. You're training your ear to notice clues, little signals that someone disagrees with you even when their voice stays calm and friendly. Just quickly, if you're not totally sure what B1 level means, don't worry about it too much. It's not something you need a certificate for to follow along today. Roughly speaking, B1 means you can already understand the main points of clear, everyday English. You can handle simple conversations about familiar topics, and you're starting to feel more comfortable with longer stretches of natural speech, even if fast or very casual English still trips you up sometimes. If that sounds like you, today's lesson is going to feel just right, challenging enough to teach you something genuinely new, but not so fast or complicated that you lose the thread of the story. And if you're a little below or above that level, honestly, that's completely fine too. The patterns we're covering today are useful at almost every stage of learning English. So just relax, listen at your own pace, and pause as often as you need to. So, picture Naomi. She's 28 years old. She works at a small marketing company in a busy city, and she's the kind of person who always tries to keep the peace. She doesn't like conflict. But as you'll see today, you don't need a big argument to have a disagreement. Most disagreements in English happen quietly, almost gently. And that's actually the hardest kind to catch if you're still learning the language. A loud argument is easy to notice. A soft, polite disagreement is sneaky. It slides past you if you're not paying close attention. Naomi's day starts at the office. She works with a man named Daniel, who sits at the desk right across from hers. They're working together on a project, a new advertising plan for a client who sells running shoes. Naomi has an idea. She thinks the advertisement should be funny, light, full of jokes, because she believes that's what will make people remember the brand. She turns to Daniel and says, "I really think we should make this ad funny, like genuinely make people laugh. That's what's going to stick in their heads." Now listen carefully to how Daniel responds, because this is our very first example of a polite no. Daniel says, "That's an interesting idea, and I get where you're coming from, but I'm not totally convinced humor is the right move for this particular client. Maybe we could think about something a bit more emotional instead?" Did you catch it? Let's slow it right down. Daniel never says the word no. Not once. But if you listen to the whole sentence, he is absolutely disagreeing with Naomi. He starts with something called a softener, a small phrase that makes the disagreement feel gentler before it even arrives. He says, "That's an interesting idea," which sounds positive, almost like a compliment, but it's actually a polite way to open the door to disagreement. Then he adds, "I get where you're coming from," which means, "I understand your thinking." But again, this is just preparing you for the disagreement that's about to follow. Then comes the real disagreement, hidden inside the words, "but I'm not totally convinced." That phrase, "I'm not totally convinced," is one of the most common ways English speakers say no without saying no. It means, "I don't agree with you," but it sounds so much softer than a direct refusal. This is a really good moment to pause the video if you want to. Try saying that sentence out loud yourself. "I'm not totally convinced humor is the right move for this client." Say it slowly, then say it again a little faster, like a real conversation. Notice how the voice usually goes a bit gentle and slow right at the disagreement part. That softness in tone is part of the politeness too, not just the words. Now, back to Naomi and Daniel. Naomi, a little surprised, tries again. She says, "Okay, but don't you think people just respond better to humor these days? Look at how popular funny ads have become." And Daniel, still calm, still friendly, responds with, "You might be right about that in general, but for this specific brand, I just feel like it could come across as a little unprofessional. What if we tried a middle ground?" Again, no actual no. Instead we get, "You might be right, but," which is another classic disagreement pattern. English speakers love this structure. Agree a little bit first, just a tiny bit, and then disagree with the word but. It softens the blow. It makes the other person feel heard before you tell them you don't actually agree. I want you to notice something else here too. Daniel finishes by offering the solution. What if we tried a middle ground? This is incredibly common in polite English disagreement. After disagreeing, speakers often try to offer some kind of compromise or alternative, so the conversation doesn't feel like a dead end. It keeps things friendly and moving forward, instead of just stopping at, "I disagree." Let's practice this together. I'm going to say a simple opinion, And I want you to imagine you disagree, but politely, the way Daniel just did. Ready? Here's the opinion. I think we should paint the office walls bright orange. Pause the video now and try to build your own polite disagreement using a softener, then but, then your actual opinion, and maybe an alternative idea at the end. Something like, that's a fun idea, but orange might be a bit too bright for a workplace. What about a soft yellow instead? There's no single correct answer here. The goal is just to practice the pattern, the rhythm of soft agreement, then but, then your real opinion. Naomi and Daniel's conversation continues for a few more minutes, and eventually they land somewhere in the middle, a plan that has a little humor but stays professional too. Naomi isn't upset. She actually appreciates that Daniel disagreed with her gently, instead of just saying, "No, that's a bad idea," which, let's be honest, could have felt pretty harsh. This is actually one of the real reasons English speakers use these soft disagreement patterns so much. It's not about hiding the truth or being fake. It's about protecting the other person's feelings while still being honest about your own opinion. Once you understand that purpose, the patterns start to make a lot more sense, and you start hearing them everywhere. Before lunch, though, there's one more moment at the office worth slowing down for, because it shows a slightly more formal version of the same skill. Naomi has a video call scheduled with a client, a woman named Sandra, who runs the running shoe company they're making the advertisement for. Sandra wants the whole campaign finished 2 weeks earlier than originally planned, and honestly, Naomi knows that timeline just isn't realistic, not without rushing the work and lowering the quality. This is a trickier kind of disagreement because Sandra is a client, someone Naomi needs to keep happy, not just a co-worker she chats with casually every day. The call begins, and Sandra says, "So, I was hoping we could actually move the launch date up. Is there any way we could have everything ready by the 15th instead of the end of the month?" Naomi takes a small breath, and you can almost hear her choosing her words carefully. And then she says, "I really appreciate how excited you are to get this out into the world. And honestly, that energy is great. That said, I want to be upfront with you. The 15th would be really tight for us to maintain the quality we're aiming for. Would it be possible to look at something like the 25th as a middle point?" Notice how much more formal and careful this disagreement sounds compared to the earlier one with Daniel. The softening is bigger, more cushioned, because the relationship is more professional and a little more delicate. "I really appreciate how excited you are" works as a strong, warm opener, almost like patting around the disagreement so it lands gently. Then comes a really useful phrase for professional disagreement, "that said," which works exactly like "but," just slightly more formal, and a touch smoother sounding in a business context. After "that said," Naomi gives her honest concern. The 15th would be really tight, using the word "tight" instead of something blunter like "impossible," because "tight" softens the refusal even further, while still being completely honest about the real problem. And, true to form, she immediately offers a specific alternative, the 25th, rather than just leaving a vague, open disagreement hanging in the air. Sandra pauses for a second, clearly thinking, and then says, I hear you. Let me check with my team and see if the 25th could work on our end." This is interesting too, because Sandra's response includes that same vague future phrase we talked about earlier, "Let me check." But this time, in a business setting, it usually really does mean a genuine need to check with other people, rather than a polite way of avoiding a real answer. Context matters a lot here. The same phrase can carry slightly different real meanings depending on who's speaking and the situation they're in, which is exactly why listening practice like this, paying attention to context and relationship, matters so much more than just memorizing fixed phrases. Let's pause for a quick practice moment here too. Imagine your boss or a client asks you to finish something faster than you think is realistic. Try building a polite professional disagreement out loud right now, using a warm opener. Then, "that said," instead of just "but," your honest concern using a softening word like tight or challenging instead of something harsher. And finally, a specific alternative suggestion. Practicing this exact structure is genuinely useful because this kind of conversation happens constantly in real working life, in English-speaking offices everywhere, and being able to disagree professionally without sounding either weak or rude is a skill that can really help your career, not just your English score. Lunchtime arrives, and Naomi heads out to meet her best friend, a woman named Priya, at a small cafe near the office. They've known each other since university, so they're very comfortable with each other. But even close friends use these polite disagreement patterns constantly, maybe even more than strangers do, because they care about each other's feelings. Priya is sitting at a table when Naomi arrives, and right away she says, "Hey, so this weekend, a few of us are going hiking up at Bell Mountain. Super early start, like 6 in the morning. You should come." Naomi, who is famously not a morning person, says, "Oh, 6 in the morning is really early. I'll have to see how I'm feeling, but it sounds like it could be fun." Stop right there for a second. This is a beautiful example of catching a polite no through tone and word choice rather than a direct statement. Naomi never says, "No, I don't want to go." She says, "I'll have to see how I'm feeling." In English, when someone says they'll see how they feel, especially about something in the future, this is very often a soft way of saying they probably won't come, but they don't want to close the door completely or hurt your feelings by refusing right away. It leaves a small opening, just in case, but realistically, the chances are pretty low. Priya, who knows Naomi well, picks up on this immediately. She laughs and says, "Oh, that's a no, isn't it? You hate early mornings." And Naomi laughs too and admits, "Honestly? Yeah, 6 a.m. is just not happening for me. But I'd love to do something with you guys later that day, maybe lunch after." Notice how once the soft disagreement is acknowledged honestly, Naomi offers an alternative again, lunch instead of hiking. This is such a common pattern in English. Soften, hint, then, if needed, offer something else as a replacement, so the relationship stays warm even though the original request gets a polite no. Let's pause again here for some listening practice. I want you to imagine someone invites you to something you really don't want to do. Maybe it's karaoke, and you hate singing in public. How would you respond using a polite hint instead of a direct no? Try saying something out loud right now, using a phrase like, "I'll have to check," or "I'm not sure if I can make it," or "maybe, we'll see." These small phrases are incredibly useful because they're vague on purpose. That vagueness is actually the whole trick. A direct no feels final, and a little cold. A vague maybe feels softer, even when, deep down, everyone understands what it really means. Here's something important I want to highlight because it really matters for your listening skills. Often, the words alone won't tell you everything. The tone of voice carries a huge part of the meaning. If Naomi had said, "I'll have to see how I'm feeling," with excitement in her voice, bright and quick, it might actually mean she's genuinely thinking about it and leaning toward yes. But because she said it slowly, with a slight hesitation, almost like she was searching for a gentle way out, the tone told Priya the real answer before the words even finished. This is why just reading English isn't enough if your goal is understanding real conversations. You have to train your ear for these small shifts in speed, pitch, and energy. A flat, slow, hesitant tone usually signals disagreement or refusal, even if the words themselves sound open. After lunch, Naomi heads back to the office, and while she's waiting for a meeting to start, she checks her phone and notices a message in a group chat with a few old university friends, planning a weekend trip to the coast. This is actually a great moment to talk about, because written disagreement, the kind you find in texts and group chats, often follows slightly different rules than spoken disagreement, even though the underlying politeness is very similar. One friend, a woman named Hannah, writes, "Okay, so I found a place for the coast trip. It's a bit pricier than I expected, but it looks amazing. What does everyone think?" Naomi, who's trying to save money this month, types back, "Ooh, it does look lovely. Honestly, the price is a bit more than I was hoping to spend right now, though. Is there anything similar but a little cheaper? Happy to look around too, if that helps." Notice how, even in writing, all the same patterns survive. "Ooh, it does look lovely" is the softener, doing exactly the same job it would do out loud. Honestly, works almost like a little spoken pause translated into text, signaling that something a bit more direct is coming next. "The price is a bit more than I was hoping to spend right now, though," is the real disagreement, using though instead of but, which is extremely common in casual texting, often placed at the end of a sentence rather than the middle. And then, true to form, an offer to help find an alternative, "Happy to look around too, if that helps," keeps the group dynamic friendly and collaborative rather than turning Naomi's money concerns into an awkward moment for the whole group. One small but genuinely useful tip for reading English text messages and group chats, since punctuation and emoji often carry tone in writing the way your voice would carry it out loud in speech. A message ending with just a single period, especially a short blunt one like "sure" or "fine," can sometimes read as a bit cold or even mildly annoyed in casual texting culture, even though the same word said out loud, with a warm tone, would sound completely friendly. Meanwhile, a message using something like, "Yeah, sounds good, LOL," with extra punctuation and a casual laugh marker usually signals genuine, relaxed agreement. Disagreement in texting often hides behind soft words too, just like spoken English, but you also have to watch for things like message length, since a much shorter reply than usual, especially from someone who normally writes a lot, can sometimes be its own quiet little signal that something's slightly off, even before you've read the actual words closely. Hannah writes back pretty quickly, "Oh, totally, no worries. I'll have a look and send a couple of cheaper options tonight." And just like that, the small disagreement is resolved smoothly. No tension at all. The group chat moves on to planning what snacks to bring on the trip instead. Let's pause for a moment of practice here too. Think of a group chat or message thread you're part of, in any language, and imagine someone suggests something a bit too expensive, or a bit too far, or a bit too early for your taste. Try typing, even just in your head, a polite written disagreement using a softener, then though or but, your honest concern, and an offer to help find something better. Notice how naturally the same spoken patterns we practiced earlier slide right into written, casual English too. Then, in the evening, she calls her younger brother, Theo. Theo is 23, still figuring out what he wants to do with his life, and he and Naomi have a close but sometimes bumpy relationship. The kind where you love someone deeply, but you also disagree about plenty of things. Theo wants to borrow some money to help pay for a new laptop, which he says he needs for freelance design work. Naomi loves her brother, but she's a little cautious with money, especially after lending him money before that took a long time to get back. Theo says, "Hey, so, I was thinking, could you maybe lend me a bit of money for a new laptop? I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next project payment." Naomi pauses for a second and says, "I mean, I really want to help you out. You know that. But I'm just a little worried because last time it took a while for things to get sorted. Maybe we could figure out a smaller amount, or maybe a different way to help." Listen to how layered this disagreement is. Naomi starts with, "I really want to help you out," which is a strong, warm opening, almost the opposite of disagreement. This is a powerful technique called leading with empathy. Before disagreeing, especially with family or close friends, English speakers often clearly state their care or good intentions first, so the disagreement that follows doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like caution from someone who loves you. Then comes the classic but, followed by the real concern, "I'm just a little worried because last time it took a while." This isn't a flat refusal either. Notice she doesn't say, "No, I won't lend you money." Instead, she expresses worry, gives a reason rooted in the past, and then, true to the pattern we've seen all day, offers alternatives, a smaller amount, or a different way to help. This moment is emotionally a bit heavier than the others, and I think it's worth sitting with for a second, because real disagreements often carry real feelings underneath them. Naomi isn't trying to trick her brother or manipulate him. She's genuinely torn between wanting to support him and protecting herself from a situation that made her uncomfortable before. The soft language isn't fake niceness here. It's actually a reflection of true mixed feelings, love plus hesitation, both at once. That's actually one of the deepest reasons polite disagreement language exists in English at all. Life is rarely a simple yes or no. Most real feelings sit somewhere in the messy middle, and the language people use often reflects that complicated middle ground, rather than hiding it. It's worth pointing out, too, that the order of these elements can shift around quite a bit in real conversation, and that's completely normal. So don't worry if a sentence you hear doesn't follow the exact same order we've been practicing today. Sometimes the alternative comes before the disagreement. Sometimes the warmth gets repeated twice, once at the start and once again at the end, almost like a gentle hug wrapped around the honest part in the middle. The goal isn't to memorize one fixed formula and expect every sentence to match it perfectly. The goal is to recognize the ingredients, the softener, the but or its quieter cousins, the honest opinion, the alternative, the caring tone, so that whenever you hear them mixed together in whatever order a real speaker happens to use, your brain immediately understands what's actually happening underneath the words. Theo, a little disappointed but understanding, replies, "Yeah, that's fair. I get it. Maybe just enough to cover half, and I'll figure out the rest myself." They land on something that works for both of them, and the call ends warmly, with Theo thanking her and Naomi reminding him to call their mum more often, which makes Theo groan a little, the way siblings do. Let's pause again for some active practice. Think about a time you had to set a boundary with someone you love, maybe about money, time, or a favor. How could you express care first? Then your concern? Then offer some kind of middle ground? Try building a sentence out loud right now, structured like this. Start with warmth. I really want to help. Add your concern using but, and then suggest an alternative using maybe or what if. This pattern shows up constantly in real English conversations between family members and close friends, so it's worth practicing until it feels natural in your own mouth, not just in your head. On her way home from the phone call with Theo, Naomi runs into her upstairs neighbor in the hallway, a friendly but slightly chatty man named Gregor, who's lived in the building for years and seems to know everyone's business. Gregor stops her and says, "Hey, quick thing. My nephew's band is playing a little show in my flat this Friday night. Nothing too wild, just some friends. Maybe you'd want to pop up for a bit?" Naomi, who has an early start on Saturday and really values her sleep, responds, "Oh, that's really kind of you to think of me. Music nights sound fun in theory, but Fridays are honestly when I try to wind down a bit before the weekend. I might just have an early one this week." This exchange is a really good one to slow down and study, because it shows a slightly different flavor of polite refusal, the kind we use with neighbors, people who live close to us, and who we'll keep seeing again and again. So the relationship really matters, even if it's not a deep friendship. "That's really kind of you to think of me," works as a warm, appreciative opener, almost thanking Gregor for the invitation itself, separate from whether she's going to accept it. "Sounds fun in theory" is a wonderfully sneaky little phrase worth remembering, because, in theory, quietly signals that something sounds good as an idea, but probably won't actually happen in real life. It's a soft way of admitting, "This is appealing on paper, but I'm not going to do it." Then, "I might just have an early one this week," finishes the refusal gently, using might instead of a firm statement, which leaves things sound inflexible, even though, realistically, Naomi has basically already decided she won't be going. Gregor, easygoing as ever, just laughs and says, "No worries, fair enough. I'll keep the volume down for you anyway." And that's it. No tension, no awkward silence. The disagreement passes by smoothly because both people understand the unspoken rules of this kind of polite refusal. Let's pause here for a moment of practice. Think about a neighbor, a classmate, or an acquaintance, someone you know but you're not super close with, inviting you to something you'd rather skip. Try saying a response out loud using "sounds fun in theory," but, or a similar phrase, followed by your real, gentle excuse. Notice how this phrase, "in theory," might become a really handy tool for you. A single small phrase that quietly communicates "probably not" without ever sounding rude or dismissive toward the person who invited you. It's a small moment, barely 30 seconds of conversation in the hallway. But it's a good reminder that this skill isn't reserved for big important moments, job interviews, business meetings, family arguments. Most of the time, you'll use it and hear it in tiny throwaway exchanges just like this one. The kind that happen so quickly, you might not even remember them an hour later. That's exactly why training your ear matters so much, because these small moments are everywhere, stacked one after another throughout an ordinary day, quietly shaping how comfortable and connected you feel in a language that isn't your first. Later that evening, Naomi has one more small disagreement, this time with a complete stranger, which actually shows us a slightly different version of polite refusal, the kind used with people you don't know well at all. She stops by a small corner shop near her apartment to grab a few things before heading home. At the counter, the shop owner, an older man named Mr. Whitfield, who Naomi has chatted with a few times before, says, "We just got some new imported chocolate in. Very popular. Lots of people love it. You should try some." Naomi smiles and says, "Oh, that looks lovely, thank you. But I think I'll just stick with my usual snacks today. Maybe next time, though." This is a wonderfully clean, simple example for you to study. "That looks lovely, thank you," is the polite cushion, the warm opening. "But I think I'll just stick with my usual" is the actual disagreement, the actual no, dressed up in softer clothing. And "maybe next time" is, once again, that gentle door left slightly open, even though in casual, everyday situations like this one, maybe next time often really just means probably not, but I don't want to seem rude. Mr. Whitfield, completely unbothered, simply says, "No worries at all. Have a good evening." And that's it. The disagreement passes by smoothly. No tension, no awkwardness. Both people totally comfortable with how it went. I really want you to notice the phrase, "I think I'll just stick with," because this exact pattern shows up constantly in English, in restaurants, in shops, in casual offers between friends. "I'll stick with," or "I'll just go with," usually signals a polite refusal of a new option in favor of your existing choice. If a waiter says, "Would you like to try our special dessert today?" and you say, "I think I'll just stick with the regular menu, thanks," you've politely declined, without any awkward bluntness at all. Let's do a quick listening challenge together right now. I'm going to describe 3 short situations, and I want you to think, even just in your head or out loud if you're alone, about how you'd politely disagree or refuse in each one. First, a coworker invites you to a party you really don't want to attend. Second, a friend suggests a restaurant you don't really like. Third, a family member asks to borrow your car for the weekend, but you need it yourself. Try forming at least one sentence for each, using the patterns we've practiced today. A soft opener, the word "but," and maybe an alternative suggestion at the end. There's no need to be perfect. The goal here is repetition and comfort, training your mouth and your brain to produce these patterns naturally, the same way you're training your ears to catch them. Now, let me give you some example answers, just so you have something to compare your own attempts against. Not because there's only one right way to say these things. For the party invitation, you might say, "That sounds like fun. Thanks for thinking of me. But I've already got something on that evening. Maybe next time, though." For the restaurant suggestion, something like, "Ooh, I've actually been there before and it wasn't really my thing. But I'm happy to pick somewhere else if you want. Or we could try that new place on Baker Street instead. And for the car request, maybe. I really wish I could help out, but I actually need the car myself this weekend for something. Is there any chance you could grab a rental? Or maybe I could drop you somewhere if it helps? Notice something in all three of these example answers, something we haven't talked about explicitly yet, but that's been quietly present this whole time. Almost every single polite disagreement we've practiced today ends with a question, or at least an open invitation for the other person to respond. Maybe next time? Or we could try that new place instead. Is there any chance you could grab a rental? This little detail matters more than it might seem. Ending a disagreement with a question keeps the conversation alive. It invites the other person back into the discussion, rather than leaving them stuck with a flat, closed statement. It signals, even after disagreeing, I still care about figuring this out together with you. Try going back through the three examples you built a moment ago and see if you can add a small question at the end of each one, just to practice this extra layer of softness and connection. Before we move into the recap, I want to mention a couple of common mistakes I see learners make once they first discover this whole world of polite disagreement. Because knowing the patterns is only half the journey, using them well is the other half. The first mistake is overusing softeners until the sentence loses all its meaning. If you stack up too many cushioning phrases, something like, "That's a really interesting point," and "I totally understand where you're coming from," and "I think it's a valid perspective, but maybe, possibly, perhaps it could be, that I'm not entirely sure if I fully agree," the listener can actually lose track of what you're trying to say. Politeness works best when it's clear, not when it's buried under endless cushioning. A good rule of thumb is one solid softener, one clear but, and one honest opinion, rather than piling on every soft phrase you know all at once. The second common mistake goes the other way. Learners sometimes hear these soft patterns so often that they start using vague phrases like maybe or we'll see, even when they actually do agree with something, just out of habit, because that's the English they've absorbed the most. This can accidentally make you sound less enthusiastic or less committed than you really feel. If your friend invites you to something you genuinely want to attend, saying, "maybe we'll see," might actually confuse them, since that phrase usually signals hesitation or polite refusal, not real excitement. So it's worth remembering that these soft, gentle structures exist specifically for moments of real disagreement or genuine uncertainty, not for everyday agreement. When you actually agree with something, it's usually better and clearer to just say so warmly and directly, "Save the cushioning language for when you genuinely need to soften a no." The third mistake, and this one is really just about confidence rather than grammar, is learners sometimes avoid disagreeing altogether because they're nervous about getting the softening wrong somehow. But honestly, even a simple, slightly imperfect version of these patterns goes a long way. Saying something like, "That's nice, but I don't really want to," is already miles softer and more natural than a flat "no," even if it's not as polished as the examples we practiced with Naomi today. Don't let fear of imperfection stop you from practicing this in real conversations. Native speakers are almost always far more forgiving of small grammar slips than learners expect, especially when the overall tone and intention come across clearly and kindly. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because I want to give you a clearer mental map of all the patterns we noticed today, since recognizing the pattern is honestly half the battle when it comes to listening comprehension. The first big pattern is the softener plus but structure. Something positive or understanding comes first, then but, then the real disagreement. Phrases like, "That's an interesting point, but," or "I see what you mean, but," or "You might be right, but," all follow this exact shape. Once your ear catches that little word, but, arriving after something that sounded agreeable, you should immediately expect a disagreement is coming right behind it. The second pattern is vague future language. Things like, "I'll see," "I'll have to check," "maybe," "we'll see how it goes," "I'm not sure yet." These phrases technically leave the door open, but in real, casual conversation, they very often function as gentle ways of saying, "probably not," or "I don't want to commit." The key listening skill here is paying attention to tone. Said quickly and brightly, these phrases might genuinely mean uncertainty. Said slowly, flatly, or with a small hesitation, they usually mean a soft no. The third pattern is the "I'm not totally convinced" or "I'm not sure I agree" structure, a way of expressing disagreement about an idea, an opinion, or a plan without ever using a flat, direct refusal. This pattern is everywhere in workplaces especially, where people need to disagree with ideas constantly without sounding harsh or aggressive toward their colleagues. The fourth pattern, and this one is incredibly common, is leading with care or appreciation before disagreeing, especially with people you're close to. "I really want to help, but," or "I love spending time with you, but," or "I appreciate you thinking of me, but." This pattern wraps the disagreement in warmth, reminding the listener that the refusal isn't about rejecting them as a person. It's about a specific situation or limitation. And the fifth pattern is offering an alternative right after disagreeing. This one shows up again and again throughout Naomi's whole day, with Daniel at work, with Priya at lunch, with Theo on the phone, with Gregor in the hallway, with Mr. Whitfield at the shop. English speakers love to soften a no by quickly following it with a different option, a compromise, a substitute, anything that keeps the conversation moving forward in a positive direction rather than just stopping cold. There's actually a sixth pattern too, one that doesn't live in the words themselves at all, but in how those words are spoken, and I think it deserves its own moment of attention, because it's honestly one of the trickiest parts of listening comprehension for learners at every level. Not just B1. This is the pattern of tone and pacing. Throughout today's conversations, you probably noticed me describing things like a small pause, a slightly slower voice, a gentle hesitation, right before the real disagreement arrived. This isn't decoration, it's actually a core part of how English speakers signal polite disagreement. A genuine yes tends to come quickly, with steady or even rising energy in the voice. A polite no, on the other hand, often arrives a beat slower, sometimes preceded by small sounds like or well, and often spoken just slightly more quietly or carefully than the rest of the sentence. Think back to Sandra on the video call, pausing before saying, "Let me check with my team." Think back to Naomi, hesitating slightly before telling Theo she was a little worried. These pauses are not empty space. They're actually meaningful, almost like a tiny warning sign that something delicate is about to be said. Once you start listening specifically for these little hesitations, these small changes in speed and energy, you'll start catching polite disagreement even in fast, casual speech, even when you don't catch every single word clearly. Sometimes the tone alone is enough to tell you everything you need to know about what someone really means. I think it's worth saying clearly here that none of this is about English speakers being dishonest or sneaky. It's actually the opposite. This whole system of soft disagreement exists because people care about each other's feelings and want to maintain good relationships even while disagreeing. Once you understand these patterns, conversations in English start to feel a lot less confusing. And honestly, a lot less scary too, because you stop wondering whether someone secretly disagrees with you. You start hearing it clearly, calmly, the moment it happens. Let's go back to Naomi one more time, because her day isn't quite finished yet. And there's one final scene I want you to listen to carefully, since it brings together almost everything we've talked about today in one single short conversation. Naomi gets home, tired but content, and her roommate, a woman named Clara, is in the kitchen cooking dinner. Clara asks, "Hey, do you want to split a pizza tonight? I was thinking pepperoni." Naomi, who actually had a salad in mind because she's trying to eat a bit healthier this week, responds, "Ooh, that does sound good, but I was actually planning on something lighter tonight. How about you get the pizza, and I'll just have a salad, and we can still sit and eat together?" Listen to how naturally all 5 patterns appear in just 2 short sentences. The softener, "That does sound good." The disagreement marker, "But." The real preference stated clearly but gently, "I was actually planning on something lighter." And then the alternative offer that keeps the relationship warm and connected. "How about you get the pizza, and I'll just have a salad, and we can still sit and eat together." Clara happily agrees, and the 2 of them sit down for dinner, chatting about their days, completely comfortable. No tension at all, even though Naomi clearly disagreed with the original pizza plan. As they're eating, Clara mentions, almost in passing, that the whole day reminded her of how often people actually disagree without even noticing it. Since she'd had a similar little moment with her own manager earlier that day. Naomi laughs and says something like, "Honestly, I think I disagreed with about 5 different people today, and somehow nobody got upset about any of it." And that, really, is the quiet heart of everything we've explored together in this lesson. Naomi's day wasn't dramatic. There was no big fight, no slammed door, no raised voices. And yet, underneath the surface, she navigated disagreement after disagreement with a colleague, a client, her best friend, her brother, her neighbor, a shopkeeper, and finally her roommate, all without a single moment of real conflict. That's the quiet power of these soft, polite patterns. They let people be completely honest about their real feelings and opinions while still protecting the warmth of the relationship around them. If you think back over your own day, or even your own week, I'd bet you've had moments just like these too, maybe without even realizing it at the time. A friend suggested something you weren't excited about. A coworker pushed back gently on your idea. A family member asked for something you weren't fully comfortable giving. The next time something like that happens, Try listening just a little more closely. See if you can catch the softener, the quiet but, the vague little phrase doing more work than it seems to on the surface. The skill we've been building today isn't just useful for understanding videos like this one. It's useful for understanding real people, in real conversations, happening all around you, all the time. I want you to try something now, a slightly bigger practice challenge. I'm going to give you a full mini-scene, and I want you to imagine playing both characters, switching your voice slightly for each one if you can. Even if you're alone right now watching this. Character 1 says, "Let's watch a horror movie tonight." Character 2, that's you, doesn't like horror movies at all. Try building a full response out loud using everything we practiced, a softener, but, your real opinion, and an alternative suggestion. Maybe something like, "Ooh, I know you love those, but they genuinely give me nightmares. How about we watch something a bit lighter, like a comedy instead?" Say it a few times until the rhythm feels natural in your mouth, not just understandable in your head. There's a real difference between understanding a pattern and being able to produce it smoothly yourself. And speaking practice like this strengthens both your listening and your speaking at the same time. Let's try one more, just a little trickier, because this time the disagreement is about something a bit more personal. And personal disagreements often need an extra layer of gentleness. Character 1 says, "I really think you should apply for that manager position. You'd be perfect for it." Character 2, you again, actually has no interest in management and prefers staying in a hands-on role. Try saying your response out loud now. Here's one possible version, just for comparison once you've tried your own. "That really means a lot. Thank you for believing in me like that. But honestly, I think I'm happiest doing the hands-on work rather than managing a team. Maybe down the road that could change, but for now, I'm pretty content where I am." Notice how this response leans more heavily on appreciation at the start. That really means a lot, because the original comment was a compliment about Character 2's abilities, not just a casual suggestion. When someone disagrees with praise or encouragement, acknowledging that compliment sincerely before disagreeing tends to feel especially important. Otherwise, the disagreement can accidentally come across as ungrateful, even if that's not the intention at all. Try practicing this one a few times too, paying attention to how your voice naturally wants to slow down and soften right around the word "but." The same pattern we've heard from every character in Naomi's story today. Before we wrap up today, I want to talk for a moment about why this particular skill, catching polite disagreement, matters so much for your overall English fluency, beyond just understanding Naomi's day. Imagine you're in a real meeting at work, and your manager says, "That's an interesting proposal. I'll think it over." If you don't catch the soft disagreement hiding inside that sentence, you might walk away believing your idea is probably moving forward, when actually your manager was politely signaling hesitation or even a quiet no. Misunderstandings like this can affect real decisions, real plans, even your confidence in professional or social situations. Learning to hear these soft signals isn't just an academic listening exercise, it's a genuinely practical life skill for anyone using English in school, work, or daily relationships. Let me give you two more quick examples from different parts of life, just so you can see how far this skill really reaches. Imagine you're in a job interview, and after you describe your experience, the interviewer says, "That's great background, definitely relevant. We're still speaking with a few other candidates, but we'll be in touch soon." If you don't recognize the pattern, you might walk out feeling fairly confident, assuming things went really well. But notice the structure again. A positive softener. That's great background, followed by information that, read carefully, often signals a polite way of managing expectations. We're still speaking with a few other candidates. It doesn't always mean no, of course. Sometimes it's simply true and neutral. But trained ears learn to hold their excitement a little more carefully after hearing a phrase like that, rather than assuming the job is basically guaranteed. Or imagine you're at a doctor's appointment describing a symptom, and the doctor says, "I hear what you're saying, and that's a fair concern. But based on what I'm seeing, I don't think that's likely what's going on here. Let's keep an eye on it for now, though, and we can revisit it if anything changes." This is actually a really gentle, caring way for a doctor to disagree with a patient's worry without dismissing their feelings, while still being honest about their professional opinion. If you only caught the first half, "I hear what you're saying, that's a fair concern," you might mistakenly think the doctor agrees with you completely, when actually, the real medical opinion, the disagreement, comes right after that small but crucial word, "but." I also want to mention something encouraging, because I know learning a language can sometimes feel discouraging, especially with subtle stuff like this. The fact that you're even watching this video, thinking carefully about tone, softeners, and hidden meaning already puts you ahead of plenty of learners who only focus on vocabulary lists and grammar rules. Real fluency, the kind that lets you actually connect with people, lives in exactly this space, in tone, rhythm, intention, and emotional nuance. It's harder to learn than memorizing a list of words. Sure, but it's also far more rewarding once it clicks, because suddenly, conversations make sense in a whole new way. Let's do one more full round of listening practice before we finish up, just to really lock these patterns into your memory. I'm going to read a short conversation, and I want you to listen for the moment of polite disagreement, then pause if you need to, and say out loud what you think the real meaning is underneath the words. Here it goes. Person 1 says, "Do you want to come to my cousin's wedding with me next month? It'll be a big event, lots of dancing." Person 2 responds, "Oh, that sounds like such a fun celebration. Congratulations to your cousin. I'd love to celebrate with you somehow, but weddings with big crowds are honestly pretty overwhelming for me. Maybe we could grab coffee before or after instead. Just the two of us." Take a moment, pause if you'd like, and think about what's really being communicated here. The real answer, underneath all that warmth and softness, is no, I won't be coming to the wedding. But notice how much care went into delivering that no. Genuine congratulations first, a clear statement of wanting to celebrate the relationship in some form. An honest, vulnerable reason for the refusal, big crowds feeling overwhelming, and then, true to form, an alternative suggestion that keeps the connection alive, coffee together separately. This single short exchange contains basically every pattern we've covered today, all working together smoothly and naturally. Let's listen to one more example like this before we move toward wrapping up, just to give your ear one final round of solid practice. Person 1 says, "Honestly, I think you should just quit your job and travel for a year. Life's too short. You'll figure the money out later." Person 2 responds, "I really love how adventurous you are, and there's a part of me that's tempted, not gonna lie. That said, with my situation right now, I don't think I could do something that big without a plan in place. Maybe I could look at shorter trips for now, and keep the bigger adventure as a future goal, instead of jumping in right away." Pause again here and notice the structure. "I really love how adventurous you are" is warmth and genuine appreciation. "There's a part of me that's tempted, not gonna lie" is actually a lovely, honest touch, admitting the idea has some real appeal, which makes the upcoming disagreement feel even more sincere rather than dismissive. "That said" arrives as our familiar disagreement marker, slightly more formal than a plain but doing exactly the same job. "I don't think I could do something that big without a plan" is the honest core of the refusal, careful and measured rather than blunt. And finally, the alternative, shorter trips now, the bigger dream kept for later, gives the conversation somewhere positive to land, rather than simply shutting the idea down completely. I want to leave you with one more important listening tip before we finish, something that ties everything together. Whenever you're listening to English speakers, especially in casual or emotional conversations, train yourself to listen specifically for the word "but" and for slightly hesitant pauses right before someone shares their real opinion. These two small signals, the word "but" and a small pause or change in tone, are like little flashing lights telling you, "Pay attention. The real meaning is coming right now." Once you start noticing these signals consistently, your listening comprehension for natural, fast, casual English is going to improve dramatically, probably faster than you'd expect from such a small shift in attention. One quick, honest note before we close, just so you have realistic expectations as you keep practicing this in real life. These patterns aren't exactly identical everywhere English is spoken. British speakers, for example, tend to lean especially heavily on understatement and softening, sometimes to the point where a sentence like, "It's not quite what I had in mind," can actually mean a fairly strong disagreement, just wrapped in extremely gentle, almost minimizing language. American speakers often soften things too, but sometimes a little more directly, with phrases like, "I'm gonna be honest with you," appearing right before a clearer disagreement than you might get from a British speaker in the same situation. Australian and Irish speakers often add a layer of humor or casual warmth into the mix, sometimes teasing a little before disagreeing, which can feel confusing if you're not expecting it. None of this means you need to master every regional style separately right now. It simply means staying flexible, staying curious, and remembering that the core patterns we practice today, softeners, but, vague future language, care before disagreement, alternatives, and tone, show up almost everywhere in English, even if the exact flavor shifts a little, depending on where the speaker is from. Before we get to the closing thoughts, I want to give you a small piece of homework, something simple you can actually do this week, not just today while watching this video. Pick one English show, podcast, or even a YouTube video with real conversation in it, something a little casual, maybe a sitcom or a chat show. Watch or listen to just 5 minutes of it, and your only job is to count how many times you hear the word "but" Arrive right after something that sounded positive or agreeable. Don't worry about understanding every single word around it. Just focus on catching that pattern, the softener. Then but. Then the real opinion. You'll probably be surprised how often it shows up once you start actively listening for it, rather than letting it pass by unnoticed. This kind of small, focused listening practice, called shadowing by some teachers, where you listen closely to a tiny chunk of real speech again and again, is honestly one of the most powerful tools available for improving listening comprehension. Far more effective than passively watching hours of content without any specific goal in mind. If you want to take it one step further, try replaying that same 5-minute clip a second time, but this time, pause right after you hear a softener and try to guess out loud what kind of disagreement might be coming next, before the speaker even finishes their sentence. This turns passive listening into active prediction, which is exactly the kind of mental skill that strong, fluent listeners use constantly, often without even realizing they're doing it. Over time, this kind of prediction becomes automatic. Your brain starts anticipating the shape of a sentence before it's even finished, and that anticipation is a huge part of what makes someone sound and feel truly fluent in a language, rather than simply translating word by word in their head. All right, let's bring this video to a close. But before you go, I have a few things I genuinely want to ask of you, because this channel really does grow through people like you sharing it, engaging with it, and coming back for more. If this video helped you understand something that used to confuse you, even just a little bit, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach other learners who need exactly this kind of practice. If you're new here, consider subscribing to English in Fluency, because we release new listening practice videos regularly, covering all sorts of real conversation skills just like this one, always broken down clearly, always at a pace and level that respects where you actually are in your learning journey. And here's something I'd love for you to actually do, not just think about. In the comments below, try writing your own short example of a polite disagreement. Maybe something that's happened in your own life recently. In your own words, even if it's not perfect English. I read these comments, and honestly, some of the best learning happens when you try producing the language yourself and getting a little feedback or encouragement back. I'll be honest with you for a second, too, because I think it's worth sharing. When I first started making videos for this channel, I used to think fluency was mostly about vocabulary, just knowing more words than the next person. But the longer I've done this, the more I've realized that real fluency, the kind that makes you feel relaxed and confident in a conversation, rather than constantly translating in your head, comes from exactly this kind of awareness. Noticing tone, noticing softness, noticing the small gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. That's why I keep coming back to stories like Naomi's, rather than just handing you a list of phrases to memorize. A list is easy to forget. A story, with real characters and real little moments of tension and resolution, tends to stick in your memory a lot longer. And honestly, it's a lot more enjoyable to learn from too. If you found today's topic useful, you'll probably enjoy some of our other videos on this channel too, since we regularly explore these subtle, real-life sides of English that textbooks often skip over completely. Things like understanding sarcasm, catching hesitation, recognizing sincere versus polite compliments, and picking up on emotional tone in everyday speech. In fact, next time, we're planning to follow another ordinary day, this time looking at how English speakers soften bad news. Things like "unfortunately" and "I'm afraid," and other gentle ways people deliver disappointing information without sounding cold or harsh. If that sounds useful to you, that's even more reason to subscribe now so you don't miss it when it comes out. Learning a language isn't just about grammar rules and vocabulary lists, even though those matter too, of course. It's about understanding people, their feelings, their intentions, the things they say directly, and just as importantly, the things they communicate gently, indirectly, between the lines. That's exactly the kind of fluency we're building together here, one real conversation at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and with Naomi's slightly busy, but very ordinary Tuesday. I hope you walk away not just understanding polite disagreement a little better, but actually feeling a bit more confident the next time you're in a real English conversation and something feels just slightly off. That small intuition telling you, wait, did they just say no without saying no? Trust that intuition now, because you've trained your ear for it today. And remember, every single pattern we covered, the softener before the but, the vague little maybe, the warmth before the worry, the alternative offered at the end, the small pause that says more than words. These aren't rules to memorize and forget. They're windows into how people actually think and feel, in English and, honestly, in most languages, once you start looking for them. Keep practicing, keep listening closely, keep noticing those small but powerful signals, and I promise, conversation by conversation, your understanding is going to keep getting deeper and more natural. I'm Alex. This has been English in Fluency, and I will see you in the very next lesson. Take care of yourself, and happy listening.